Hey lady, what are you doing out here all alone? Come join us, have a drink. You think we're scared of you? Stay right here.
Let's have some fun, pretty lady.
I am the county district attorney. You can't do this.
Who do you think you are?
Nice try, you're just a girl.
We'll teach you a lesson.
It was just past midnight when Sarah Mitchell, the county district attorney and one of the most powerful legal authorities in the region, found herself driving alone on a deserted Texas highway. The world around her felt unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your thoughts louder than the engine itself. The meeting she had attended earlier had run late, and though she was used to long nights and high-pressure decisions, something about this drive felt different. There were no streetlights for miles, only the pale glow of the moon and the narrow beam of her headlights slicing through the darkness. Sarah wasn't in a government vehicle, nor was she accompanied by security. Dressed simply, with her hair tied back and her blazer folded on the passenger seat, she looked like nothing more than an ordinary woman trying to get home. As the road stretched endlessly ahead, a strange sense of unease crept into her chest. Her instincts, sharpened by years in the justice system, whispered that she should get home quickly. Without realizing it, her foot pressed harder on the accelerator. Suddenly, without warning, the car jerked violently. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then went completely silent. The dashboard lights flickered once before fading, and the vehicle rolled to a powerless stop on the side of the road. Sarah's heart dropped. She turned the key again and again, hoping the engine would respond. But the only sound was a dull clicking noise that echoed in the stillness. Her breath grew shallow as reality set in. Her car had broken down in the middle of nowhere. Stepping out cautiously, she lifted the hood and stared at the engine, though she knew immediately it was beyond a simple fix. Years of courtroom battles had prepared her to face dangerous criminals and ruthless lawyers. But standing alone on an empty highway at midnight was a different kind of vulnerability. She reached for her phone, intending to call her father, the one person who always answered no matter the hour. But as soon as she looked at the screen, her stomach tightened. No service. She moved the phone around, raised it above her head, walked a few steps up the road. Nothing. The signal bars refused to appear. For a brief moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Thoughts raced through her mind. What if someone comes along? What if help never comes? The stories she had prosecuted, cases involving assault, abuse, and misuse of power, flashed through her memory, each one a reminder of how dangerous the world could be, especially for a woman alone at night. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Fear, she knew, could cloud judgment. After a few minutes of steadying herself, Sarah made a decision. Her house wasn't too far away, and standing beside a dead car felt riskier than moving forward. She locked the vehicle, adjusted her purse over her shoulder, and began walking along the roadside, her footsteps echoing softly against the asphalt. After several minutes, her legs aching and her nerves stretched tight, she noticed faint lights in the distance. At first, she thought it might be another stranded vehicle. But as she drew closer, the lights became clearer, police cruisers, parked haphazardly near the road. Relief washed over her. Thank God, she thought. Of all people, the police would help her. But as she approached, her relief quickly turned into disbelief. Leaning against the patrol cars were 4 police officers, their uniforms rumpled, their laughter loud and careless. Empty bottles and playing cards lay scattered on the hood of one cruiser. The sharp smell of alcohol hung in the air. They were drinking, joking, and playing cards, on duty, in uniform, in the dead of night. Sarah froze. Her hands clenched into fists as a surge of anger rose within her. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was criminal. She had dedicated her life to holding people accountable for far less. Without hesitation, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through their laughter like a blade. The night that had begun with silence was about to turn into something far more dangerous, and none of them yet realized who was standing in front of them. The laughter abruptly faded as Sarah Mitchell stepped closer, her presence impossible to ignore. The officers turned toward her one by one, their expressions shifting from surprise to amusement as their eyes scanned her casually dressed figure. In their intoxicated state, they saw nothing but a lone woman standing on a dark road, someone they assumed had no authority, no power, and no protection. Sarah, however, felt a fire burning in her chest. Years of enforcing the law had taught her that silence in the face of wrongdoing only allowed corruption to grow. She straightened her posture, her voice steady but sharp as steel. "What do you think you're doing here?" she demanded. "You're on duty, in uniform, drinking alcohol on a public road. Are you law enforcers or lawbreakers?" The words struck the air with force, but instead of shame, they were met with mocking smiles. One of the officers let out a loud laugh and took another sip from his bottle. "Relax, ma'am," he said lazily. "You're talking way too much for someone out here alone at night." Another officer smirked and added, "Why don't you sit down with us? Have a little fun. You look stressed." Their tone dripped with disrespect, and the way their eyes lingered on her made Sarah's skin crawl. Anger surged through her veins. "Drinking in public is illegal," she shot back. "And you, of all people, should know that. You don't deserve to wear that badge." Her words were firm, each one measured, but they only seemed to fuel the officer's arrogance. One of them stepped closer, invading her personal space, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You've got a lot of attitude for a nobody," he sneered. "Who do you think you are, telling us how to do our job?" Before Sarah could step back, the officer grabbed her wrist. His grip was rough, possessive. "Don't lecture us," he said, pulling her slightly toward him. "Have a drink. Loosen up. You'll enjoy yourself." In that instant, fear and fury collided inside her. Every warning instinct screamed at her that this situation was spiraling out of control. She yanked her hand free with all her strength and, without thinking, slapped him hard across the face. The sound echoed in the night. "Touch me again and you'll regret it," she shouted. "You are abusing your power, and I promise you, this will end your careers." The officer staggered back, stunned more by the insult than the pain. For a brief second, silence fell. Then another officer lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can hit a cop and walk away," he barked. "You need to be taught a lesson." Two of them moved toward her at once, their intentions unmistakably hostile. Sarah's heart pounded violently as fear tightened its grip around her chest. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Stop," she warned. "I am the county district attorney. I am suspending all of you right now. Tomorrow, the sheriff will hear about this." The words should have carried weight. They should have ended everything. Instead, they were met with roaring laughter. "The DA," one officer scoffed. "You don't look like a DA." Another shook his head mockingly. "Nice try. You think we're stupid." In their drunken disbelief, they grabbed her again, harder this time. Panic surged through Sarah as she realized how dangerously vulnerable she was. No witnesses, no signal, no help. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, Sarah twisted free and ran. Her lungs burned as she sprinted down the dark road, gravel cutting into her shoes. Behind her, heavy footsteps thundered closer. One officer caught up quickly, grabbing her arm and spinning her around violently. He struck her across the face, his voice low and threatening. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. "Do what we say, and maybe we'll let you leave." Tears blurred Sarah's vision, but her mind raced. She knew that if she didn't escape now, the consequences would be horrifying. As the officer tightened his grip, something caught her eye, the service revolver at his side. In a desperate, instinctive move, she reached for it. With a sudden burst of strength, she yanked the gun free, pointed it at them, and screamed, "Stay back." The officers froze. Fear finally flickered across their faces. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah turned and ran again, her heart pounding with one terrifying thought. This night was far from over, and justice would demand a reckoning. By the time dawn broke, Sarah Mitchell had barely slept. The events of the night replayed relentlessly in her mind, the mocking laughter, the hands grabbing her, the cold fear that had settled into her bones as she ran for her life. Every sound outside her window made her tense. Yet beneath the fear was something stronger, resolve. She had spent her career prosecuting criminals who hid behind power, money, or influence, and she refused to let what happened be buried under silence. As the sun rose, painting the sky in pale gold, Sarah made a decision. She would not run from this. She would confront it, by the book. After a quick shower and a change into simple clothes, she drove straight to the undersheriff's office, her jaw set with determination. Inside, the building buzzed with routine morning activity. Officers moved briskly through hallways, phones rang, paper shuffled. Sarah approached the front desk and requested a meeting with Undersheriff Daniel Brooks. When he arrived, she explained the incident calmly but firmly, detailing the officers' behavior from the moment she encountered them on the road. Brooks listened carefully, his expression grave. When she finished, he sighed. "Ma'am, what you're describing is serious," he said. "But suspending officers isn't simple. We need solid evidence, video, audio witnesses. Without that, it'll be their word against yours." His words weren't dismissive, but they were frustratingly realistic. Sarah nodded slowly. She understood the system. She had helped build it. Still, the thought of those men walking free, continuing to wear the badge, made her stomach turn. Leaving the office, Sarah felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The law demanded proof, not emotion. Back home, she sat quietly for a long time, staring at the wall as she replayed every detail, searching for a path forward. Then, a thought surfaced, clear and sharp. The police station. If corruption ran that deep, it wouldn't stop on the roadside. She knew how such systems worked. Power abused once was rarely abused only once. With a steady breath, she grabbed her purse and headed to the precinct where the officers were stationed, deliberately dressing down, blending in as just another citizen seeking help. At the station, the air felt heavy with indifference. Behind the front desk sat Sergeant Andrew Cole, leaning back in his chair, scrolling on his phone. Sarah approached and said calmly, "Officer, I'd like to file a report." Cole barely looked up. A crooked smile tugged at his lips. "You want to file a report?" he said. "That'll cost you." Sarah stiffened. "Excuse me," she asked. He finally met her eyes, his gaze cold and arrogant. "Filing reports takes time. Time costs money. You want it done, you pay." The words landed like a slap. This wasn't ignorance, it was open corruption. Sarah's voice hardened. "There is no law that requires payment to file a report," she said. "You're asking for a bribe. Do your job." The sergeant's expression darkened instantly. He slammed his phone down on the desk. "Don't teach me the law," he snapped. "I can lock you up right now if I want. Get the money or get out." A few officers nearby glanced over, some smirking, others pretending not to notice. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger rise within her, but she kept her composure. "You're abusing your authority," she said, "and you'll be held accountable." Just then, her eyes caught movement in the corner of the room. One of the men standing near the lockers turned his head, and their eyes met. It was one of the 4 officers from the previous night. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by unease. Sarah pointed toward him. "That man," she said loudly, "and 3 others like him. Do you know what they did last night?" The sergeant scoffed. "I don't care about your stories," he said. "You're done here." He stood, stepping around the desk threateningly. "Leave now, or I'll throw you out myself." The room had gone quiet. Sarah felt the tension coil tight, but she knew this moment mattered. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her purse and pulled out her identification. She placed it on the desk between them. "Read it," she said. As Sergeant Andrew Cole looked down, the color drained from his face. His eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly in shock. The room seemed to hold its breath. In that instant, the balance of power shifted, and the truth could no longer be ignored. The moment Sergeant Andrew Cole realized whose identification lay on the desk, his arrogance collapsed. His hands began to tremble as he straightened abruptly, nearly knocking his chair over in the process. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he stammered, his voice suddenly respectful, almost pleading. "Please forgive me. If I had known you were the county district attorney, I would never have spoken to you like that." The officers nearby froze, their expressions shifting from amusement to fear as the weight of the situation sank in. Sarah Mitchell watched them silently, her face calm, but her eyes blazing with controlled fury. "That's exactly the problem," she said coldly. "You treat people with respect only when you think they have power." The sergeant quickly grabbed a report form, his movements frantic. "Tell me everything, ma'am." "I'll write it down right now," he said, pushing a paper toward her. Sarah didn't sit. She didn't soften her tone. "You were ready to deny justice to an ordinary citizen," she replied. "You demanded a bribe. You threatened unlawful detention. And you did it without hesitation." Each sentence felt like a verdict. Cole's face flushed red with shame. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Sarah turned slightly and gestured toward the officer she had recognized earlier. "And he is one of the men who assaulted me last night while on duty," she added. Murmurs rippled through the room. The accused officer looked down, avoiding eye contact, his earlier confidence completely gone. Sarah took her ID back and slipped it into her purse. "This station is rotten from the inside," she said, "and I will make sure it is cleaned." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked out. Her heels echoed sharply against the floor, each step fueled by purpose. Outside, she got into her car and drove straight to the sheriff's office, her mind already assembling the case. When Sheriff Daniel Brooks listened to her account, his jaw tightened. "There are security cameras in the precinct," he said thoughtfully. "If what you're saying is true, they would have captured everything." Sarah nodded. "Then let's watch them," she replied. Within minutes, they were reviewing the footage. The video played silently, but the truth was loud. It showed the sergeant demanding money, refusing to file the report, and threatening Sarah, completely unaware of her identity. The evidence was undeniable. Brooks leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. "This is enough," he said. "We're moving forward." Formal reports were prepared, and the case was immediately escalated to the district court to ensure transparency. Word spread quickly through the department. Whispers filled hallways. Officers who had once felt untouchable now looked over their shoulders. The following morning, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters, cameras flashing as crowds gathered. By 10 a.m., the courtroom was packed. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with anticipation. Some people whispered that nothing would come of it, that police always protected their own. Others believed this time would be different. Inside, the accused officers and the sergeant sat stiffly, their faces pale, hands clenched. Across the room sat the prosecution team, resolute and prepared. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "Case of Sarah Mitchell versus the police department," the judge announced. "Proceed." The prosecutor rose and spoke with clarity and force. "Your Honor, this case is not just about one woman," he said. "It is about abuse of power by those sworn to protect the public." He presented the footage, testimony, and documented violations. The screen displayed the sergeant's actions in stark detail. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded, her expression unwavering though her eyes glistened. The defense attempted to speak of misunderstandings and stress, but the judge cut them short. "A badge does not grant immunity," he said sharply. "It demands responsibility." When Sarah was called to the stand, she stood tall. "I did not come here seeking revenge," she said evenly. "I came here seeking accountability. If I, as the district attorney, could be treated this way, imagine what happens to ordinary citizens who have no voice." Her words resonated deeply. The courtroom was silent, every person listening. At that moment, it was clear this was no longer just a case. It was a reckoning, and the final judgment was drawing closer. The courtroom remained silent for several long seconds after Sarah Mitchell finished her testimony. Her words had not been dramatic, nor had they been emotional, yet their impact was undeniable. They carried the weight of truth, raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to dismiss. The judge leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression stern as he reviewed the documents before him. The accused officers sat rigidly, their earlier arrogance completely stripped away. Gone were the mocking smiles and careless laughter of the night before. In their place was fear, real fear. They finally understood that the uniform they had misused was now the very thing condemning them. The prosecution continued methodically, laying out the sequence of events with precision. Timestamps from the security footage were matched with written complaints. Statements from fellow officers were presented, some hesitant, some shaken, confirming a pattern of misconduct, bribery, and abuse of authority within the precinct. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom. These men were not confused. They were comfortable, he said. Comfortable abusing power because they believed no one would challenge them. The defense attorney rose several times, attempting to object, to reframe the narrative as a lapse in judgment caused by stress or alcohol. Each attempt was met with firm rejection. Stress does not excuse criminal behavior, the judge responded coldly. Nor does intoxication while on duty. As the hearing progressed, the public gallery grew increasingly tense. Some spectators shook their heads in disbelief, while others whispered prayers under their breath. Several women in the audience wiped tears from their eyes, seeing in Sarah's ordeal a reflection of fears they had carried silently for years. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited eagerly, ready to broadcast the outcome to the entire county. This case had struck a nerve. It wasn't just about police misconduct, it was about whether justice truly applied to everyone equally. After nearly 2 hours of testimony, evidence, and legal arguments, the judge called for a brief recess. When he returned, the room rose to its feet. The judge adjusted his glasses and began to speak, his voice measured and authoritative. The court has reviewed all evidence, including video recordings, witness statements, and sworn testimony, he said. It is clear beyond reasonable doubt that the accused sergeant and 4 officers violated their oath, abused their authority, and endangered a citizen. Each word felt like a hammer striking stone. The officers stared straight ahead, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The badge is not a symbol of dominance, the judge continued. It is a symbol of trust, and trust, once broken, demands consequences. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle over the courtroom. Sarah felt her chest tighten, not from fear this time, but from the emotional weight of the moment. She wasn't thinking about herself anymore. She was thinking about every person who had ever been silenced by intimidation, every complaint ignored, every voice dismissed. The judge then delivered the verdict. The court finds the accused guilty of corruption, misconduct, abuse of power, and criminal intimidation. A murmur rippled through the room. Effective immediately, all 5 are suspended from service and sentenced to 3 years of imprisonment under federal law. Gasps erupted. One officer slumped forward, his head dropping into his hands. Another shook his head in disbelief, as if hoping this was still some cruel misunderstanding. But there was no misunderstanding left, only accountability. Court officers moved swiftly, escorting the convicted men out. The sound of handcuffs echoed sharply, a sound that carried a bitter irony. The very tools they had once used to intimidate others were now restraining them. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, taking a steady breath. She felt no joy in their downfall, no sense of triumph, only a solemn acceptance that justice, at last, had done its work. As the judge struck his gavel and declared the court adjourned, the room erupted into noise. Some people clapped softly, others openly wept. Outside, reporters rushed to deliver the breaking news. As Sarah stood and prepared to leave, she felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, not as a powerful official, but as a woman who had stood her ground when it mattered most. And though one chapter was closing, she knew the impact of this moment would ripple far beyond the walls of the courtroom. As Sarah Mitchell stepped out of the courthouse, a wall of cameras and microphones surged toward her. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, their voices overlapping in a frantic chorus. "Ma'am, how do you feel after the verdict? Do you think this will change the system? Was this personal for you?" Sarah paused, the afternoon sun warming her face, and looked calmly at the crowd. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke softly, yet firmly, her words carrying farther than the loudest microphone. "This was never about me," she said. "This was about the meaning of the law. Justice only exists when the powerful are held to the same standard as everyone else." With that, she turned and walked toward her car, leaving the questions hanging in the air. As she drove away, The events of the past 2 days finally began to settle in her mind. The fear she had felt on that dark road had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. In its place was clarity. She knew that what she had done would not magically fix the system. Corruption did not disappear overnight, but it had been challenged, and that mattered. Behind her, the courthouse buzzed with activity as news spread rapidly across the county. People gathered in small groups, discussing the case with a mixture of shock and relief. Many women felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The very next morning, changes began to take shape. New officers were appointed to the precinct, their records carefully reviewed. Mandatory ethics training was announced, and an internal audit of the department was launched under direct supervision from the sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniel Brooks personally inspected the station, his presence a clear signal that misconduct would no longer be tolerated. From today onward, he stated firmly, this department will stand for protection, not fear. The words echoed through the halls, reaching officers who now understood that the era of unchecked power was over. Sarah returned to her office and resumed her work as she always had, reviewing cases, signing documents, preparing for trials. But something had changed. Colleagues looked at her with renewed respect, not because of her title, but because of her courage. She had faced the system from within and refused to bend. She had shown that integrity was not just a word spoken in courtrooms, but a principle lived through difficult choices. Emails and letters poured in from citizens across the county, teachers, nurses, single mothers, elderly men, thanking her for giving voice to what they had been too afraid to say. Late that evening, Sarah stood by her office window, looking out over the city lights. She thought about how easily that night could have ended differently, how silence might have allowed injustice to survive unchallenged. She knew many others were still suffering in quiet corners, afraid to speak, unsure if anyone would listen. And she made a silent promise to herself that as long as she wore the responsibility of her office, she would never ignore those voices. Justice, she understood, was not a single victory or a courtroom verdict. It was a constant effort, demanding courage from ordinary people in extraordinary moments. As Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave for the night, she felt a quiet strength settle within her. The road ahead would never be easy, but it would be honest. And somewhere in homes across the county, people slept a little more peacefully, believing once again that when truth stands firm, even the most powerful must bow before it.